Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to go ahead and call our budget workshop to order. We have an agenda that has been sent out, and I believe the staff sent handouts earlier today, but the Q&As came out in the Friday packet. So without any further ado, I'm just going to ask council members, because this is an electronic meeting, that we go to the, if Wendy can go to the visuals of people on the screen, so that those that are present in the room will introduce themselves, and then we will go to the council members for introductions of here. So we'll start with our deputy clerk.
Stephanie Bello, Deputy City Clerk.
Kelly Flannery, CFO.
Ryan Bergman, Strategy and Budget.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Kay Cunningham, Mayor's Office.
And I'm Vi Lyles, and I serve as mayor for the city, and we'll start with the mayor pro tem.
Mayor Pro Tem Julie Eisel, serving at large.
Dimple Ajmera, committee member and at-large member.
Greg Phipps, serving at large.
Braxton Winston at large.
Larkin Eggleston, District 1.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
Good afternoon, everyone. Matt Newton, serving District 5.
Tarek Bakari, District 6.
Ed Driggs, District 7.
So as other members join us, they know that they are to check in so that the city clerk can recognize when they've joined the meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the city manager to begin the workshop.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. If we would go back to the council's annual strategy meeting back in January, I would say that we had set out 6 meetings that were, I would call it, budget-related. In other words, the Monday strategy sessions at the beginning of the month, followed by the Wednesday budget workshops. So after today, we would be 2/3 of the way through these 6 meetings that we're trying to get direction from the council to inform us for the FY 2022 budget. What you have in front of you today, and as the mayor mentioned, and I appreciate the strategy and budget office, the Q&As made it to you over the weekend, and one of the pieces of feedback that we received last time was to please get the Q&As out to you earlier. So I'm very thankful for the hard work of staff for that. Today, we'll provide an update on key revenue. And typically this happens after the budget is introduced and the mayor will turn to me and say, are there any new updates with revenue? But we figured that because volatility of the revenue sources that we would give you an update at the beginning of each budget workshop. Today, Ryan will talk again about property tax as well as sales tax performance, and those 2 taxes are related to the general fund. But also Kelly will give you an update on 2 taxes that are connected with our hospitality fund, and that would be prepared food and beverage and occupancy tax revenues. And so as those graphs come up on the screen, red is not good, green is good, okay? And so we'll do that. Then we'll have Rodney Jameson, as Solid Waste Services Director, come in and speak with you about the future of solid waste services. As many of you know, we have the general fund, we have our CIP, but we also have enterprise funds, and those enterprise funds are typically operates by fees. The solid waste services is an exception. It's a hybrid. Part of it is paid for by taxes, and part of it is paid for by fees. We've learned a lot during COVID. We thought it would be good to give you an update of where we are with solid waste services, but also some changes that are on the horizon. The last time we were together, Ryan talked a little bit about the Americans with Disabilities Act facility plan. Today we'll give you a presentation with where we are to date, and Victoria Johnson will lead that discussion as well as some outside consultants who have been working with us. And then I know that Councilmember Driggs is super excited about having an opportunity to go back into the capital investment plan and have a discussion about priorities. As we discussed at the last budget workshop, this is the beginning of a series of bond cycles that in the past, as we started those, we would begin with a tax increase to fund future bond cycles. This is very different in that we have a steady state with capacities out there that does not assume any property tax increase. And before we talk about stormwater and the water budget outlook, and as Mr. Drake said on Monday, this is a good news story in terms of where we are in these 2 enterprise funds, if you will. We will have one follow-up that deals with arts and culture, and Tracy Dodson will be the staff resource on that discussion. There was a preliminary discussion on Monday, and eventually our goal as staff is to get a nod from the council to move forward with the examination of the proposal from the ad hoc committee. So with that said, Mayor, unless you have questions of me, we would be ready to go into item 2, which are updates on key revenue.
All right, let's move forward. Any questions for the manager before we go into the next step? Hearing nobody with any questions, we'll go right to Mr. Bergman.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm, like the manager said, I'm going to talk a little bit about property tax and sales tax, and then I'm going to turn it over to our CFO, who's going to talk about the hospitality taxes. Fortunately, the 2 slides I'll show on the general fund revenues are both good news stories, and then occupancy taxes are a little bit more mixed. But if we can go to the next slide. So last budget workshop, I showed a slide that was like this through January. And what it showed is that we were trailing a little bit where we were the prior year in property tax collection rate. We've received good news this month from our county tax collector. We're actually a little bit ahead of where we were last year. So with this information, where we're already almost to 98%, I think it's fair to say that some of the concerns that we had with the property tax collection rate this year did not materialize. We ended last year at 98.9. We plan in the budget to be at 99% currently, so that's always our target. And as we evaluate this, we'll keep getting more information from the county, but this is certainly good news and may put us on a track towards maintaining where we are currently, which is 99%. If we go to the next slide. I circled the only update that you haven't seen since last time. The slide's set up the same way as I've shown the last few times. We received 1 more month of information. It was 2.7% higher than FY20 levels, pre-pandemic levels. So this really tells the story, just like some of the state revenue information you may have heard about. Sales tax overall in North Carolina did not experience the declines that were feared. So this is good news for us with budget planning. It doesn't change dramatically where we were last month, but it's certainly a good news story going forward. I would point out on the slide, January of 21, which I know has already happened, but we get this information a few months in arrears. You'll see that we would then be starting to project being back to FY20 levels. So while we do think that will happen, we probably won't be running way ahead of our projections once we get into January and February. And so with that, I will turn it over to our CFO.
Thanks. Wendy, thanks. If you remember back in April of 2020, when we were making revenue projections for the hospitality tax revenues, there was a lot of uncertainty around the duration of the pandemic, vaccination plans, and the pace of a recovery. Economists and the rating agencies all had varying assumptions, and at that time, we mirrored models that suggested hospitality, leisure, and travel-based tax revenues would fall by up to 85% of prior year levels through the midsummer of 2020, and then begin a gradual return to the historical norms into the spring of 2021. As you can see, this approach was on budget through the summer into the fall. In fact, in October, for prepared food and beverage, revenues were only 4% below 2019 pre-pandemic revenue levels. In December, we did see revenues fall below projections, which was likely due to the second wave and restrictions. But through January, the food and beverage tax revenues are 11% above the year-to-date projections. As restrictions continue to be lifted and vaccine rollout has become more aggressive, we are optimistic that the food and beverage revenues for the remainder of the fiscal year will continue to outpace budget projections. Next slide. So that was the good news. The occupancy tax revenues are a little less optimistic. As I mentioned, in April, we projected travel restrictions to impact hotel business through midsummer and experience rebound beginning in July, increasing throughout the remainder of the fiscal year. And as you can see, that experience was more or less on target throughout the fall. However, beginning in November, we began not to realize the budget expectations, which was likely due to the second wave and restrictions and people's resistance to travel. Through January, occupancy tax revenues are 34% below the year-to-date budget projections. The good news is that due to the manager and this council's commitment to financial stability, we have in place the financial policies on these funds that have prepared us for this type of crisis. While we expect we will likely have to utilize additional fund balance to balance FY21, we do have available fund balance to fulfill our FY21 commitments and to maintain the 100% next year's debt service reserve policy. We continue to monitor these revenue sources frequently. We're working with partners at CRVA and in the travel and aviation industries to develop forecasts for FY22 to ensure we can continue to maintain the financial metrics that have allowed us to maintain a AAA rating for the last 43 years. Questions?
All right, are there questions from the council on the revenue update?
Mr. Driggs.
Mr. Driggs?
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering how these numbers affect the kind of outlook for capital spending from the hospitality funds.
Ms. Fannery?
Thanks. So for 21, all commitments that we have, so that includes existing debt, and the only capital project we have currently underway is the convention center. We expect to be able to make all of the 21 commitments as well as 22 debt service requirements will be met. Beyond that, we don't have any out of the norm capital expenses, so we're in good shape for the remainder of FY21.
But the capital plan that none of us knows that much about, are we having to kind of reschedule that at all?
So there's some commitments that we make to CRVA and building maintenance and some assumptions around what we think the increase will be every year. I think it's too soon to tell for 2022 what kind of cuts that might require, not just to capital, but to contributions throughout the fund. I think we're optimistic and hopeful that the restrictions that were lifted last week, we can experience a rebound, and maybe that and a mix of any available stimulus funds might be able to provide some relief to these funds.
Right, and I guess we'll hear more about stimulus funds, but thank you.
So I think that Mr. Driggs' point on the longer term beyond where we are and what we've committed to do will be continuously monitored and adjusted even in 22. So while we feel comfortable with the projections, that will be always something to keep our eye on. Any other questions? Hearing no further questions, why don't we move right into the next topic?
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. As Rodney Jameson makes his way into 267, again, typically we would have an update that relates to solid waste services, and many times it's the fee, right? What would be the increase in the fee? What Rodney wants to do, will do today, is tell you a little bit of a story about what we have been doing with our stellar staff in solid waste services that we're very proud of, and some challenges that we have in the short term, and lessons we've learned from COVID, and some changes that we are going to put in place. Thanks, Rodney.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Rodney Jameson, Director of Solid Waste Services. Thank you for having me. Well, let's talk trash here. So many people never need police, fire, medic their entire lives, but cannot go a week without needing to see their garbage collector. That truly shows how essential and important the service we provide to our residents are. As you all know, COVID-19 has introduced many challenges and changes to how we provide service. First, let me make sure this doohickey works for me. No.
Right at it.
Which one?
This one here.
Gotcha. All right, I'm in business now. Apologize. COVID-19 presented extreme difficulties and challenges for solid waste services. So in the meantime and throughout COVID-19, we wanted to distract ourselves and our staff in dealing with the turmoil happening in people's lives. So solid waste services wanted to continue to prepare our individuals for their next phase in life in the future. We did that through our employee and community upward mobility programs. We have an internal career pathways process that starts from our temporary good works agency all the way through supervisory leadership training. Throughout COVID-19, we had approximately 14 employees that gained their CDLs through our in-house CDL training program. and a total of 43 internal promotions throughout the COVID. We funded and supported the citywide HiSET GED program. So far, we have 3 individuals that graduated within COVID. That was the virtual sessions. We have partnered with outside agencies to reintroduce employees with barriers to the workforce. We have continued virtual financial literacy workshops, soft skill coaching, and resume writing sessions. So it's been pretty busy. We've also instituted our own food pantry within solid waste services to provide for our staff and their families. And we titled it Some, and that means so others may eat. So it's been pretty successful and worthwhile. We have a pretty resilient staff. We've been doing great. COVID, like we stated, presented many challenges, so our staff was able to continue providing services to our residents, but we had to make many enhancements and put them in place. We had to ramp up on our personal protective equipment. We brought in a vendor for daily truck sanitizing. We installed clear physical barriers in our dual occupancy rear loaders. We had to reduce the size of our crews from 3 to 2. And to take the brunt of the load or to assist with that, we actually also use CARES funding to bring in contractors and private haulers to assist in the collections. And then we continue today to provide automation training for cross-training individuals for single occupied vehicles. Now, all the services that we provide, right? We continued to provide these services throughout COVID. We provide garbage collection weekly, recycling bi-weekly, weekly unlimited yard waste collection, and then unlimited bulky collection by appointment. We also provide many other services from city-maintained right-of-way, litter picking, street sweeping, dead animal collection, small business garbage collection, and we also maintain the CATS platforms and lines as far as providing them with service. So as you see, we're pretty busy now. On this slide, you'll see a photo of a rear loader on the left. And that's us manually loading the back of that rear loader. On the right-hand side, you see an automated side loader, which that side loader only needs 1 driver and occupant to service, and that's what we use for our garbage. Reason for showing this also is if you fast forward from when COVID was introduced to the operation, July 2020, we lost a family member in a tragic accident at Solid Waste Services. OSHA was called in to conduct a full investigation. We were not cited for that situation, but in their investigation, they made strong recommendations. And one of the strongest recommendations was us to look at a side loader automation study and conduct one. So we are in the process of doing that now. In doing this, this may show us that we can reduce injury, workers' compensation claims, and insurance premiums. We've already started to move in a automated direction. We've already started the process and converted our small business garbage customers to side loader automation versus manually collection. Yard waste is one of our services that is still serviced manually by rear loaders. This chart right here shows the difference in our workers' compensation claims for a manual operation of yard waste and versus the automated collection of garbage. And you can see the distinct difference there. Now, how can we get there? Ways to improving worker safety. So these are options here that are on the table that we've been looking at, and I'd like to share them with you. So strategies to improve worker safety. The first approach could be to convert to paper biodegradable bags. Then we can look at making limits to the amount of yard waste collected per stop. And maybe further down the line, we could look at introducing automated service with yard waste bins to the process. In utilization of the compostable paper bags, it provides many benefits for us. But number one, Mecklenburg County compost facility doesn't accept plastic bags from us. So we have our workers and employees out here walking around with blades and knives because they have to bust open, cut open plastic bags, dumped in the back of the manual reel loader. And that is extremely dangerous for us to be doing. Paper bags is also a benefit to our environment. It takes plastic over 10 years to decompose. And then further down the line, if we introduce bins, this also works in conjunction with the bin operation. Here is an example of a manageable pile for solid waste services. We're looking at something that's 8 feet wide, 4 feet high, 4 feet long, and probably the size of a refrigerator laid on its back, the typical refrigerator laid on its back. So that's a manageable pile, especially being that we have now only two individuals on a truck. Converting to bins for yard waste can improve operational efficiency. It could definitely reduce the risk of coming in contact with snakes and rodents and insects that wander into the piles overnight. And then the challenges and possible disadvantages of actually going to this is the transition to bins itself, space limitations for our residents, as well as the capital investments. As our city continues to grow, we always look at other municipalities and the services they provide and at what cost. This slide right here just pretty much provides and shows that most municipalities in the state of North Carolina have either a cart-based program, limits for yard waste, or additional fees to provide services. From this point, I will pass it over to Mr. Ryan Birdman to discuss cost model analysis and fees.
Thanks, Rodney. The Budget Office and Solid Waste have had a really good relationship the last couple of years to the point that we actually assign our new analysts to Solid Waste typically because Solid Waste has such a strong management team, such strong financial management, that it's really good exposure. And I only mention that because these next two slides were a combination of work between the two departments, and I wanted to provide to council a little bit of analysis and benchmarking. So this first slide, what this shows is our solid waste fee as it currently is. We generate about $24 million in revenue. As the manager mentioned, we have kind of a hybrid system where we are primarily supporting solid waste with property taxes, but the fee revenue does support some of the costs. If you look at the actual fee ordinance, it is not specific about what the fee is paying for. It is just generally paying to help support solid waste services. So what you see on the screen is our attempt to break down the different services that solid waste offers and the actual cost. So this is inclusive of things such as trucks and inclusive of things such as management. And what you'll see is that with about $65 million in services, we recover about $24 million from the fee. So that's about 37% of costs currently that are recovered. So while this probably isn't something we would consider this year, long-term, it may be in the interest of City Council to identify a target for what that split should look like. Should it be covering garbage collection? Should it be covering everything but garbage collections? Should it be covering 50% of costs? Like I said, this is probably not an FY22 discussion, but I feel it's important context for you to understand the services that we provide. If we can go to the next slide. And it wouldn't be a budget workshop presentation if I didn't show you a super complicated slide that I had to explain. So I apologize for that. But I think it's relevant for you to understand the services we provided. As Rodney mentioned, currently we provide excellent service in every area without limits. And so I wanted to compare us in our solid waste fee to the 10 next biggest cities and towns in North Carolina. So it's the same list that you saw on Rodney's other slide a couple of minutes ago. What you'll see if you just look on the left, and this does include county solid waste fees as well, we are well below the median. We have a $67 city fee, that's annual, and we have a $40 county fee. So we are the fifth lowest there, but what is also important is if you look on the right, what that is the combined city and county property tax rate. You'll see that the red dots on the left are the same cities that are the red dots on the right. So you'll see that everybody else who provides a lower fee than us has a significantly higher property tax rate. So it's kind of a trade-off. If you actually did the analysis overall, Charlotte actually comes out ahead on a median home value. And so with that, I know there's a lot of information. I'll turn it back to Rodney and any questions you may have.
All right, we have several council members that have questions. Before we go to that, Rodney, Mr. Jameson, I would like to say thank you. When we have career employees that are able to participate in in-house training that's not just around work but around quality of life, that is so commendable. And I just want to say thank you for the leadership and thank you for what you're doing there. We don't think about food pantries a lot in this community and our own organization, but I know that there are many people that work in your area that have family, friends in areas, and I just want to say thank you for what you do. And with that, I'm going to ask, we're going to begin with questions, and Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to know, we used to talk about the fee portion as a tipping fee, is what it was referred to, and it was kind of pointed to in the context of the cost to us of tipping on county-owned waste disposal sites. So when you say there is no, historically, there is a basis for that fee, and we've gotten away from that to the point where there is a general policy question, and the mayor and others will recall that we've had this conversation in the past about what the mix should be of the fee versus the portion that is covered by property taxes. The real issue about that is incidence. Like, you need to calculate exactly where that cost lands depending on what mix you choose. But I would just make the general comment that I think this is a policy question. So I don't believe, as your budget chair, that we should be trying to answer these questions in the course of the budget process. And therefore, Mr. Bergman, I appreciate your comment that this is something we will want to take up later. I hope in the current budget cycle, we can be sensitive to the issues that were pointed out to us about needs for change in the equipment and safety of employees. But I really want to have the conversation about the mix of fees and tax funding somewhere else. And as you point out, there's a spread. People have arrived at different conclusions where the property tax rates are higher and the fees are lower and vice versa. We haven't really had, in my time on council, an intentional conversation about what that is. But I do want to make clear we are departing entirely now from the history of associating those fees with tipping fees. Thank you.
I would hope that that's not the intent of what you were trying to do, but to point out the same. I think that Mr. Driggs is making the same point that you were making, Mr. Bergman. So it shouldn't be in the context of the budget. It should be in the context of what I believe is a countywide solid waste plan that has to be updated. And if I recall correctly, I'm not sure how old the plan is that we have now, but the plan includes issues that are not just financial, but capacity and methodology. And so in a large part, I think it is Mr. Driggs's point, is that if we have a solid waste plan, we should do that as a plan for the overall service. It's a big deal if we're going to meet some of our goals for our CAP, if we're going to continue to attract the employees, the quality of employees, and utilize the equipment. There are lots of factors that go into this, and so thanks very much to Mr. Driggs and Mr. Bergman for that. Ideas of what do we do and when do we do it and when the solid waste plan comes up.
And that was my point, Mayor. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So for the, this question is for Solid Waste Director. Does this automated loader system, does it require CDL license?
Yes, the automated truck, it does require a CDL license.
So is the plan I guess what is the plan to sort of train entire workforce development to transition to this new model? Because that will require everyone get CDL. Isn't that the case?
Well, we have drivers, it requires a CDL for the rear loader as well, the rear loader truck,
Okay.
so it would just be training for specialized equipment.
Got it. So do you see any workforce impact as a result of this automation?
No, actually, I see some growth for our staff, because that's a different pay rate for an individual. So I actually see upward mobility going in this direction.
That's good to hear. Also, when Mr. Bergman, when he brings this conversation about the policy and overall fees and property tax, I would be interested in seeing if other cities in North Carolina, if they have their own enterprise fund for solid waste services, and also what is the county's model like? I know they're also having conversations about solid waste, and how would that, if there is any change in terms of fees for this year's budget from the county? Thanks.
All right, thank you, Ms. Ashmira. Mr. Phipps?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have several questions, I guess, for Mr. Jameson. It looks as if, I'm trying to figure out how sustainable are some of our practices on a go-forward basis. It looks like we're going to have to make some adjustments when we do come up with a solid waste plan, but how sustainable are our recycling efforts right now? I understand that overall across the country, recycling, the percentage of recycling items being recycled is very low, and that most of recycled materials end up in the solid waste stream. How would you describe Charlotte's recycling efforts right now? I mean, is the public being given a false sense of environmental due diligence in as much as we recycle on a biweekly basis, but how much is that of our recyclables are being processed in a manner that we expect?
All right. Recycling is actually it's in a decent place for our residents right now, but we have some work to do. So we continue to educate residents, and we putting together focus groups to focus on particular items for recycling, so we can kind of focus on what can be recycled and what is being reused versus just throwing everything in the trash. I think we're going and can do a lot better, and we'll continue to move forward with that and educating our residents. So we're working on dual activities with the county as well as our efforts in education.
Mr. Jones?
Okay. So my next question.
Before Mr.
two more
Phipps, Mr. Phipps, Mr. Jones wanted to comment on your question as well.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Phipps. We've had this conversation in the past, and this time I won't bring my wife into it and her recycling habits. One of the things that it's very important is to have a clean stream of materials. So as Rodney was speaking in this educational piece, there is an opportunity perhaps for us to be more innovative in what is recycled, right? And how we do it, and we are having partnerships with Envision Charlotte to find different ways of innovation around recycled materials. But it has been tough because, as you know, what happened in China and what's happened across the world in terms of what is received or what can be used in terms of recycling. So we're very aware of that.
Okay. Mr. Phipps?
Okay, yeah. Moving on, at the last budget workshop, we did have a quote from our mayor. I don't know if she might remember it or not, but she did say that the citizens of Charlotte like to litter. So to that point, how much funding is devoted to right-of-way litter cleanup right now? unless you live in the central business district where things seem to be, pretty much litter-free, other areas of Charlotte that I've noticed is just terribly trashy. And do you have any comments on that? I mean, do we have any hope that we can devote any more budgeted funds for litter pickup? Because that's where a lot of constituents' complaints come from when they look at litter. And of course, litter doesn't differentiate if it's a city street or a state road or not. But can you help us out on that litter front?
Yes, we can. Litter is a concern, a huge concern of ours. We have partnered with some agencies to assist, but it has been very difficult to keep up with. I mean, especially with the state streets. We can clean a street today, and tomorrow it is littered again. And we just don't have the resources to actually touch a street every week. But we do our best and bring in, we encourage people to actually adopt streets and assist us. We look for help across the city to provide that assistance. We'll come pick up the bags if you'll actually just put some garbage in them and place them in an area that we can get to. But we look for assistance, but we can get back with you with numbers, exact numbers of what we use and spend for litter cleanup.
And my final question is, with
Mr. Phipps,
regard
do you mind
to,
if I ask, Mr. Phipps, can I ask a question about
Yeah.
litter? How has COVID impacted the litter? Is there a significant difference since COVID-19 and prior year history? What if we were coming out, as we are coming out, not if, as we are coming out of this pandemic, are there things, Rodney, that you could help us think about doing and go back to doing? Because I just thought that it seems to me it has been worse this past year. And so any comment on that?
It has, and we can use COVID for a reason, but also there's a lot of individuals moving to the city of Charlotte, and the traffic and the passerbyers and mobile arena, they're tossing a lot out of their vehicles, and it's causing a lot of challenges. So things that we could do differently is just get more people involved, enforcement of some sort, to clean the areas in the city of Charlotte.
It might be really good to get our Keep Charlotte Beautiful committee
Yes.
to send us something that they think that would work and ask for their feedback, because these are people really committed to what we're doing.
Yes.
Coming out of the pandemic, what would they like to see us do?
True.
And participate and accomplish. Mr. Phipps, sorry, thank you for allowing me that time.
yeah, my final question on this topic is, relates to the yard waste pickup. What's stopping paper bag usage now in terms of things for like leaf collection and such?
A lot of residents use plastic. I think it's easier, convenient, easier to fill, but a lot of people are using plastic bags to put their leaves in. So it would just take an act of actually transitioning people into using paper bags.
But is there a movement afoot to do just that? Because you said they got the blade cutters and such, and I guess people spending money on their plastic bags, and you're cutting them, but those plastic bags end up in a container that you all have on the truck, right? So they're
That's
not.
correct. That is correct.
It seems like it's a very inefficient process there.
So, Mr. Phipps, nothing's stopping us. As a matter of fact, that's why we're talking with you today. This is a very logical step forward. With that said, there takes a bit of education for our residents that there is going to be a change. But for every reason that Rodney said earlier, just from the safety of our employees to our environment, this is a no-brainer. And we intend to move forward with this conversion.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Jamison. I'm glad to hear that we're moving forward with the with bags instead of the plastic. I want to ask a question about, you had mentioned that perhaps you're going to have to limit the amount of yard waste And with regards to that or recycling, I remember Representative John Autry, who used to be on council, would bring up the idea of pay as you throw. Is that something that, especially for yard waste, is that something that has been considered? I know it would require other equipment.
Yes, it has been looked into, but the way our fees are structured, it would be problematic at this time. But maybe something in the future we can talk about.
You want to add that to the solid waste plan list?
Yes.
I just wondered, because I know you'd have to have special equipment that can weigh it and whatnot, but I wondered if it was a consideration. And then I'll just also mention, I've noticed a big difference in the level of service from your team. So I just want to thank them for maybe all this internal training you're doing is really paying off, but I've noticed them being a lot more courteous and friendlier when you wave at them on the street or talk to them. And the bins are, back where they started instead of in the middle of the street after they've been collected. So I do appreciate the improvement in level of service from the team. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Ms. Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to piggyback off my predecessor, Councilmember Phipps. In District 4, we have a lot of state-owned roads, primarily it seems. So I wanted to get some clarification from Mr. Jamison, what the plan is to partner or to manage those state-owned streets.
Right now, we're partnering with the state on that, but also with our outside, the agencies that we brought in. We're giving them a list of streets, and those streets in your area, I did receive those. We have those on the list to touch, but those areas are areas that once we clean one day, sometimes the next day, it's back littered again. And a lot of traffic is in that area, increased traffic is in that area.
So is there going to be a schedule that they'll be maintained or cleaned, or will it be sporadically?
There will be, those streets are being placed on a schedule.
Okay. Okay, because one of the things that we're doing in the area, Jane Talon is setting up a meeting with the vendors for the apartment complexes. That's one of the complaints or one of the findings that we've been told that some of the vendors that are picking up trash from the apartment complexes, the trash is not secured. So that's one area that we're working with the apartment complexes. And also UNCC reached out to me, and they're going to be working with the advanced high school engineering students to try to come up with some solution to address the litter, because this is such a huge area in District 4. I get complaints, and I'm sure that Mr. Phipps got them, prior to my term. We get them constantly about the litter in the area. And because of the state-maintained streets, it's very problematic. So any attention to that would be great. If there's additional funding in the budget, that would be great, because this area is truly affected because of the state-maintained streets. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, I don't have anyone else to be recognized, and so we'll go ahead and continue. And our next section, thank you, Mr. Jamison. All right, our next presentation is the ADA facility plan. Ms. Johnson or Mr. Jones?
Well, that's fine. So thank you, Mayor, members of council. As I mentioned earlier, at the last budget workshop, we had a conversation that there would be an impact of the results of the Americans with Disability Act facility plan that we could implement over time. So we'll have Victoria begin the conversation and bring our consultants in also. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. The city contracted with Altura in 2019 to evaluate all city-owned and occupied facilities, programs, policies, procedures, and public-facing information technology applications for ADA compliance. Altura was also tasked with providing an ADA transition plan for the city. As of now, Altura is 85% completed. The recommendations will allow city staff continued commitment to serving the public. The recommendation shows the city's commitment to protecting everyone's civil right, more than just the civil rights of people with disability, and more about equality of service for all citizens. The city can clearly demonstrate actions being taken in today's social environment. The recommendations would elevate the importance of the civil rights in both public and with city staff. And at this point, I will turn it over to Terry Bradley, Deputy Director of Community Relations. He will speak to the enormous amount of work that Altura and his department has undertaken for the city to have reached this point in the process. Mr. Bradley.
Good afternoon. Thank you, ACM Johnson. I appreciate that. Thank you, council members, mayor, council members, and Manager Jones for this opportunity. Just wanted to kind of give some insight about the work that we've been doing, as ACM Johnson has mentioned. The Community Relations Department has been charged with coordinating and monitoring city compliance with ADA Section 504, as well as the state civil rights requirements regarding discrimination and harassment based on disability. As a civil rights law, the Americans with Disabilities Act provides for freedom of harassment or denial of services solely based solely on disabilities. Also, we are overseeing the compliance efforts to minimize the occurrence of ADA Section 504 violations. We're implementing the city's discrimination complaint procedures, including investigations with respects to allegations to ADA. And following the adoption of the 2010 regulations, the city began to undertake, and we continue to undertake, the self-evaluation of all of our programs, services, and activities, as well as the facilities to provide full and equal access to all persons. While working with our consultant, to which I'm about to introduce to you, we have determined that this work is more about social justice and equity and the inclusion within the city of Charlotte. It also allows our citizens to connect to good paying jobs. Also, it's a way for us to enhance public safety, and it allows our residents an opportunity that they can still work, play, learn, and retire comfortably here in the city of Charlotte. Now, with that, I just want to turn this over to our consultants out of Austin, Texas, Altura Solutions, Jesus Ladazama, who is the principal, who will update us on the work around the city's assessment and the development of the ADA transition plan. Jesus?
Yes, thank you, Terry. And thank you, City Manager, Mayor, and Council for your time. We appreciate it. As Terry mentioned it, I'm with Altura Solutions, and we are working on the city's ADA transition plan. And I'd like to give you just a little bit of an outline of the presentation. I'm going to briefly go over what the Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan entails. And I'll also go over how we gathered the information to date and the rigors that we went through. And then Ryan will help discuss some of the budget planning aspects of that. But if we could go to the next slide. A brief background, as it's been stated before, the Americans with Disabilities Act is a federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. And in fact, it ensures access to state and local government services for people with disabilities. However, as Terry mentioned, while the focus of this was through the ADA lens, we have looked at it as more of a broader civil rights component. The Department of Justice, or DOJ, requires that government agencies conduct a self-evaluation of the accessibility of their facilities, programs and services, as well as policies and procedures. So The ADA was enacted in 1990, and of course, a lot of infrastructure had been built before that date and not to the standards. So this gives government agencies the opportunity to go back and conduct a self-assessment of what the current state of their facilities are. And also, I'd like to point out that the ADA does not require every single facility to be brought into compliance. Instead, what the ADA aims for is program accessibility, which means that in its entirety, when the city looks at its facilities and programs, is it providing programs and services in an equitable manner? So next slide. So the ADA transition plan, after a government agency has gone through the self-evaluation process, then the city basically creates a plan to address all the identified barriers, whether they be physical or programmatic. The transition plan identifies the physical barriers, recommends remedies, and proposes cost along with timeframes. So in essence, it helps the city put itself on a budget and schedule to reach program accessibility. And this transition plan is going to serve as the city's guiding document to achieve program accessibility over the next 15 years from the facilities standpoint. As mentioned earlier, the city contracted with Altura Solutions to provide the transition plan, and it was mentioned earlier, we're at the 85% complete mark as of now. Next slide. So as part of the assessment, we began this process in January 2019. We interviewed city staff from every department to get a feel for programs and services, how the city operates, and definitely want to commend staff for their dedication and service and meeting the requirements of the ADA. We have inspected 175 facilities, and I want to speak to the fact that our specific analysis was for facilities. There is a separate analysis being done for the right-of-way, which I'll touch on in a bit. But we looked at 175 facilities, and these excluded aviation facilities since aviation had done an independent assessment outside of ours. What we have found is that there are buildings that do have some barriers. These are typical of what we see across the country, adjusting of counter heights, adjusting of drinking fountains, some restroom items that need to be addressed, installing of new ramps, and eliminating obstructions in pathways. Next slide. So for the facility improvements, we are recommending improvements to 124 facilities. And these range, as I mentioned earlier, from moving counters to redoing restrooms and so forth. Part of our scope was to provide conceptual budgetary costs. These are not engineering cost estimates, but more to provide an order of magnitude of what is required of the city. We have met with several city departments to run these numbers that we've put together and make sure that the numbers are providing that an order of magnitude for what is coming next. And as I mentioned earlier, in the right-of-way, the city is doing a separate assessment, and the consultant Cole & Associates is completing that assessment. And that includes infrastructure such as sidewalks, curb ramps, transit stops, pedestrian push buttons, and on-street parking. They have not completed that study yet, but they are recommending for their findings to be addressed programmatically over 30 years. Again, the facilities portion that we are doing is over 15 years. The right-of-way, since it is a larger scope, will take 30 years to address programmatically. The approach also includes private development, in that when a developer does a project, they will be asked to address the sidewalks and curb ramps in the right-of-way, which should help the city reach accessibility sooner. Once the information is completed in the right-of-way, the overall city transition plan will incorporate those findings into the facilities and programs transition plan. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Ryan.
So I just want to spend 2 slides explaining what this may mean from a budgetary standpoint. What you see on the screen are the identified costs in total, but as Chewy mentioned, the intention is that this is a 15-year plan, which from a general fund standpoint allows it to be a little bit more manageable as a program. We have $4 million per year identified in our capital program that we would need to include to address this. I really want to reinforce the point that this is fluid. For instance, we know that some costs will change when we go to engineering, but there's also some facility improvements that will drop out of the program as we replace some buildings. For instance, there are 2 fire stations with a total of over $1 million in improvements that are very high on the fire chief's replacement plan and will likely be done through that before we get to fixing the facilities from the ADA program. If we can go to the next slide. And so what this means on the capital program is we have bonds and then we have other debt that we call COPS. So in the steady state that we talked about last time, there was $226 million, and we had identified about $28 million for COPS. What this is essentially saying is that $4 million each year would need to be dedicated to a program like this to achieve the goals that are likely to come out in the final report this summer. So we also talked last time about some other opportunities we have in COPS as far as capacity. So we feel that this is a goal we can achieve, but it is a high cost impact though, so we really wanted to get it in front of you. And then I will turn it back to Chewy to finish up.
Thank you, Ryan. Our next steps, as I mentioned earlier, we're basically at 85%, and we'll be releasing the draft in either late March, early April. That draft will include our recommendations for facilities and associated budgets. We will allow for public input to occur from April through May. We will then take that public input and formulate the final ADA transition plan, which is planned to be released this coming summer for council consideration. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Thank you very much. First, before we go to the questions, I want to thank the nonprofit Disability Rights and Resources for working with Altura and our staff. This is a very important part of infrastructure and creating equity in the community. It's a part of our own mobility plan. It's a part of what we need to do. And I want to thank all of our the people that participated in the surveys and the interviews, but especially Disability Rights and Resources for their good work with us. So with that, I think I have Mr. Egel, is it Mrs. Mira is recognized. Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Terry, thank you so much, and Chewy, for your work on, like Mayor said, creating equity and inclusiveness in our city buildings. Is there a regulatory requirement that some of this transition assessment has to be done and implementation has to be done by a certain time frame? And how does that, what does that look like currently?
Yes, thank you for the question. You know, the Department of Justice has not given a timeline. So, you know, originally, when the ADA was first enacted, everything was supposed to have been made ADA compliant by 1995, which, of course, you know, no city achieved, you know. And so now it's up to each city to create a budget and a schedule to get themselves to reach program access. We worked with city officials to get to a budget number that made sense, or the budget number and the schedule that made sense. In other words, we didn't want to say that this could be done in 5 years, knowing that the fiscal situation would not allow it. But we believe that 15 years for the facility side makes sense and is achievable. And something to commend the city for is this is being done to try and get ahead of of ADA and reach an equitable position. Because if, for example, the Department of Justice came in and found that the city was lacking, then the Department of Justice would put the city on a schedule and with probably less consideration to the budget. You see other cities that are told you will achieve this in 5 years, and it's up to you to figure out, from a budget standpoint, how to do it. So the city of Charlotte is ahead right now, and that the city gets to make the call in terms of budget and schedule. So I think there is, some kudos to be had for city staff to get ahead of this issue.
All right.
Thank-
Ms. Ajmir,
thank you,
any other
Chair.
questions?
Yes, I do have a follow-up question. As part of this assessment, have you also looked at Pregnancy Disability Act and how, if there are any changes that city needs to make in terms of infrastructure or invest to be compliant with the PDA?
And I want to make sure I heard you correctly. The PDA is the pregnancy?
Yes.
Okay. We did not look at pregnancy specifically. We, our lens is basically, the Americans with Disabilities Act, but working with city staff, we did expand some to include language inclusion in what we did. And we believe that some of the recommendations that come out of the Americans with Disabilities Act benefit many more society members than just people with disabilities. So some of the recommendations being made here would benefit, pregnancy issues, but we did not look at that specifically.
Thank you. To follow up on that, Mr. Manager, this one is for you. I'm not sure what our infrastructure is like to support pregnant women, especially the need around nursing room. So I would appreciate in your follow-up report if you could provide us where we stand on that. Thank you.
Will do.
All right. Ms. Ajmir, thank you. Any other questions? Nope. All right, Mr. Phipps, I want to recognize you.
I had taken my hand down, Mayor, because I think the gentleman answered my question about the Charlotte's favorable grade in meeting their programmatic schedule with regard to the outside infrastructure, with regard to the ramps and things like that for ADA compliance.
Okay. Ms. Johnson, I'm going to be recognized then.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for this presentation, Terry and Chewy. My question is also for the manager. As far as our ADA plan, I realize this evaluation was looking at facilities. Does the city have a plan for equitable hiring for individuals with disabilities, and also for STS transportation? I believe that the policy currently is STS will pick up residents where there is a bus stop, and there's some half-mile requirement, but if an individual has a disability that makes it difficult to walk a half mile or get to a bus stop, then there needs to be some equitable consideration in pickups. So I wondered what the city, or if the city has a plan for ADA and some equitable consideration for hiring and for CATs.
So thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. We will give you all of the information we have around those questions that you just asked. I am very familiar with the second one because Council Member Newton and I have discussed that from time to time. And while it is consistent with my understanding, CATS is consistent with what is required federally, and there could be some additional costs to change from that. But what I'll do in order to bring all of the council members up to speed, we'll include in the packet information about what we do around those two areas and what are some opportunities, if that works for you.
It's great. And, you know, I work with individuals with disabilities, so I'm happy to speak with you offline about some of the experiences that they've had with cats and some ideas for hiring as well.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Driggs, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to highlight in particular our veterans who are disabled, and so I'm very pleased that we are addressing the needs of the entire disabled community with this initiative. I did want to ask, since you referred to the fact that we were taking a broader interpretation of the ADA, are there non-facility type of items that would be included here? Are there any investments we're talking about making that can't be funded with COPS? Well, what do you have in mind when you say that we may kind of take this broader view of the ADA?
Yes. For example, when the ADA requires that you gather community input, and ADA specifically wants you to get input from the community with disabilities. And speaking with community relations, they said, well, let's take it a step further and include, and let's have language inclusion. So let's have our materials translated to different languages. Let's have not only sign language interpreters, but other language interpreters at our meetings. So that's an example of what we took a broader look at ADA from a civil rights standpoint. However, the main focus was still centered around meeting the requirements, the technical requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we will definitely do that. But that's just one example of us thinking beyond it. We have analyzed how the city does programs and services, how they provide those. And we have addressed or provided our input where there are opportunities where the city might be unknowingly discriminating. And in that instance, we look at not only people with a disability, but other potential aspects of where that might be happening. On the physical side, on the facility side, we did stick primarily with the requirements of the ADA, and those are programmatically where we could broaden our scope a bit.
Okay, this is a pretty big financial commitment, so I just would like us to be disciplined. If we're going to call it an ADA program, that we, that we recognizably operate within the requirements of the ADA. I would also like to echo Ms. Johnson's comments about the SDS. I've had a couple of constituents who called me and said that their eligibility for this service had somehow changed because of a redesignation of who qualifies. And in some cases, they ended up having really no means because with the loss of the SDS, they would have to be taking Ubers, which for a lot of people was really not feasible. So have we actually changed the eligibility for the SDS, or is that an ongoing conversation?
So, Mr. Driggs, again,
cats, yeah.
We will give you information. My understanding is that there are opportunities that are county provisions of a service as well as city provisions of the service. And we have been consistent with what is required of us from a federal perspective. But I would love the opportunity to provide you with that information so the council can have a discussion around that.
A couple of these cases were pretty sad, so I don't really have a policy background on this subject, but I just hope that we have a policy that doesn't leave certain people out in the cold, because it's very lonely for them at some point when they lose that access. So thank you for that, Mr. Manager.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have no further comments, I would say, on the this topic. So we're prepared to go to the next topic, which is the CIP priorities discussion. And I think, Mr. Bergman, are you going to lead us, or Mr. Jones, are you going to kick? Mr. Bergman's going to lead us off?
I'll start and see if the manager would like to chime in at all.
No, he just said no, so I can see
Okay.
behind you, Mr.
Put him in a
Bergman.
bad spot there.
He was like pointing forward, get out in front, way out in front. Okay.
So I'm just going to spend a minute going over the last couple of slides from the last presentation. There's not new materials here. If you'll recall, we presented a lot of information around our capital program at the last workshop. And then where we ended up, we didn't have a lot of time for council discussion. So I'm just going to show these final scenarios again. And really the idea here is that this is the time for council discussion. Normally, the manager's proposed budget is the first time you would see and then react to it. But this is such a unique situation recently where we have this 5-year CIP that hasn't been populated, that we really want to make sure we have a touch point with City Council to talk about your priorities, needs, things of that nature. We do have the same people that were here last time available in CH14, which includes Liz Babson, our Transportation Director, Jennifer Smith, our City Engineer, Phil Rieger, our General Services Director, and we also have Pam Weidman available for any housing-related questions. So if we can go to the next slide.
And Mayor, I forgot Ryan in my pre-planned discussion point. So I will jump in. and so one of the things I will say to the mayor and council is that, again, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, this will be difficult because there are programs in the CIP that were even in the planning fund that typically have not been in these bond cycles over the last 8. And those are major roads and major intersection projects. But also has not been a part of the beginning of a series of bond cycles, at least the last 2. There have been tax increases. This one does not propose a property tax increase. So in other words, we're able to use the steady state model to populate the different bond cycles at this point without coming back for any type of revenue enhancement in order to afford it. So again, having said that, and as Ryan said earlier, typically I would just bring this to you on the 3rd of May, but we just believe that because there is no roadmap per se, just understanding what priorities are for you would be very helpful as we move forward.
And so what you'll see on the screen, I'll say the same thing I said last time. This is not a recommendation. This is more like a straw man to give you a starting point of the 2 bond cycles that would be in the 5-year CIP, while also showing some of those costs that are essentially locked in if we're going to continue doing the basic programs for maintenance and street resurfacing and things of that nature. So this first scenario, which still leaves more than 50 million in capacity each bond cycle, assumes no road projects and no intersection projects from the planning fund. If we go to the next slide. So everything is the same on this one except for that middle section. This assumes 1 road project and 1 intersection project from the planning fund. We would still be able to do it within the steady state. We would have a little bit of extra capacity. And then if you go to the final scenario, one slide ahead. Okay, there we go. Thank you. This shows the impact of doing both road and both intersection projects from the Advanced Planning Fund in the CIP if you left some of those other programs at similar levels to 2020. And so while we wouldn't formally approve something for a bond referendum in this upcoming budget, we wouldn't do that until FY23. We would like to have a 5-year CIP roadmap that is in this proposed budget. So with that, we can leave these on the screen or not, but really the intention here is to allow City Council a chance to talk about their priorities, questions, things of that nature.
So for the council, this is in the workshop for February the 3rd, and this was where we talked about steady state, and it was, our steady state of 26 million for COPS and 198 million in GO bonds. But obviously, when you look at that, the big even with the opportunity to pivot on several projects and to do this work, if we're going to get roads built and intersections improved, which I'm sure there is a very much longer list than one or two, it's like 47 million, well, I think it was like 35 million a road and 12 million for an intersection, and that assumes that we continue to do those things that we do in terms of maintenance, and I don't know how. I think, Ryan, can you put up the slide with the, it doesn't, I think this is consistent on all of the projects that we have under the no roads or intersection, just any one of the graphs, or charts. Those first 9 or so projects are things that keep our maintenance down, as well as commit to some of the major programs that I would say people expect us to spend our debt for, like sidewalks and bikes and safety. So there's, I think the discussion is probably at, you know, how do you, maybe this is, maybe I'm going to ask if this is an appropriate way. If we continue to maintain our capital facilities, and if we continue to build upon safety primarily, the question is, those things that we have chosen, transportation or mobility, housing, corridors of opportunity, and economic development, we're looking below those two lines to say, are there trade-offs or do we do more? Is that a fair way to say that?
Yeah, and so what I would add is if you look at what's on the screen, the first 3 are traffic and bridge programs. They're locked because we do need to continue doing them, but there's also not a necessity to add funding or anything of that nature. The next 2, Nisi and Ballantyne, those are essentially commitments that are already made. When you get into the bottom ones, the sidewalk, the bike, the Vision Zero, that's kind of an open lock because you would need those to maintain the program, but they're different than like traffic devices in that more funding for those is, of course, always helpful. But then when you get down to the ones under the advanced planning projects, you're correct. Those are affordable housing, corridors, congestion. Those are always things that we do kind of to look forward. That's really at the purview of City Council.
So I'm going to say that while almost everything in that first group has some federal inspection, some requirement that would cause greater harm or would actually cost more. If we stop resurfacing street and building sidewalks, we're just going to go deeper, further behind than we already are. And I'm going to say this, and I know that we'll have a number of people to talk about this, but when I look at everything in this grouping, these are things that we have discussed consistently as being major needs for a growing city, and things that we've communicated to our residents that we're going to try to systemically add to our programs. And so I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I think Ms. Ajmira is going to start us off. Ms. Ajmira?
Thank you, Madam. So I completely agree with you that we have to continue to invest in the first bucket where we have sidewalk program and traffic devices and so on to continue the maintenance. For Vision Zero, I would like to see that number a little bit higher because that prevents fatalities and also reduces some of our liabilities in terms of pedestrian fatalities, where we really need to invest $2 million a year will barely fund 1 or 2 streetlight projects, where we have major roads in our city that do not have public lighting that results in fatalities, and we do need to address that. So I'd like to see that, what's the need, and see if we can get that number a little bit higher. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ajmira. Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Mayor. Guys, I'm going to take my life in my hands here, okay?
No, don't do that, Ed. Just say yes and move on.
Yeah, I know. So the way this is presented, it seems to suggest that the top range and the bottom range are, pretty much locked in. I accept what Mr. Bergman just said, and that our decision revolves around the items, the advanced voting. And I just want to point out, and bear with me here, affordable housing, we went to 50 million with the intention of stepping down to 25, and I thought I remembered reverting to 15 in the aftermath of the Keith Lamont Scott shooting. Now we see it kind of plugged in here as if it was a permanent fixture. And I fully agree that affordable housing is a top priority of ours and deserves our funding. But if you look at the annual investment here and you compare it to the last 4 bond cycles, the number is pretty level at around 200 million. So we have gone to diverting 25% of our capital capacity to one priority, one important priority, but nonetheless just one. And I will point out that the funding that we have in there for sidewalks, just as a for instance, this is a pet peeve of mine, apparently doesn't allow for us to make progress on the waiting list of sidewalk projects such that a couple of them in my district can be accommodated in anything less than 10 to 20 years, I'm told. And we have sidewalks that are, we have roads that have become major thoroughfares along the edges of which children walk to school with cars whizzing by at 50 miles an hour. And I think that's a legitimate priority. If you look at the core responsibilities of the city, I think responding to situations like that, where there are safety issues that are becoming kind of increasingly more urgent, again, because of the growth of traffic and because of the speed at which a lot of cars who are transitioning along these roads zoom through them. So I, for example, would like us to consider to put the affordable housing in the middle section there to be considered along with these road planning projects and other things, and really think about whether we're keeping up with our responsibilities in other areas while we pursue this goal of creating more affordable housing. I don't think that we should go to some big tax increase. Obviously, you wouldn't expect that from me. But I just would like to see the apportionment more reflective of other needs. And sidewalks is a good illustration in my mind. And I will point out that if you look at the 2040 plan and a lot of the aspiration that is in there, it's going to be very hard for us to continue to commit 25% of our capital capacity to one priority and also try to achieve a lot of the other things to which the plan aspires. So I would just like us in this budget conversation to include in the mix of choices we have to make the amount of money that goes into affordable housing and keep an open mind about that. And I would love to see us step up the sidewalk funding to $30 million so that we can make some progress on that waiting list. And Mr. Manager, I'd appreciate it if we could actually get a list of the projects that CDOT has identified, the sidewalk projects that are pending and how they've been ranked. I think if district representatives from other part of Charlotte take a look, they're going to see that things that they recognize as needs are probably 10 to 20 years away on the current schedule. So I just put that out there, and I hope we can at least talk about what our ongoing commitment to housing should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. So Mr. Driggs really touched on what I was going to say. I'm looking at these numbers. Sidewalks, I think, are also really important because what's in our sidewalk program is new sidewalks. And last time I asked Liz about this, Ms. Babson, about what about sidewalk repairs? And we have a lot of sidewalks that are in bad shape and that you couldn't, certainly talking about ADA, you certainly can't get through if you were in a wheelchair or in some sort of, if you were immobile. We've got sidewalks in older parts of town that have utility poles right in the middle. You couldn't push a baby carriage past that or a wheelchair, certainly. So I really don't know how to look at this when we say 18 million a year, a bond cycle for sidewalks. And as Mr. Driggs says, I really want to know what the demand is, what the backlog is, and what that includes. Are we ever going to talk about sidewalks that need to be torn out and replaced or just fixed. And the same goes really for congestion mitigation. I just don't have a frame of reference for that as to what the overall need is. Same with street resurfacing. I think we've all probably gotten the occasional email from residents who hit a pothole in Charlotte. It does, in some cases, thousands of dollars of damage to their car. They don't get reimbursed from the city on that. They just have to clean that privately. So the needs are there. I'd like to know a little bit more about what the backlog is.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mayor Pro Tem and Mr. Driggs, we will get you that backlog as it relates to sidewalks. I do want to talk a little bit about the congestion mitigation because it's something that was old is new again. So instead of having, let's say, before the big ideas, a steady stream of funds for, let's say, some of those smaller projects that can help us with congestion mitigation. What we've done is put out, I guess, on this buffet, everything that can happen. So it's not an either or, it's, roads. We're assessing that as well as traffic congestion mitigation, which I will speak for Liz, that is very important to her because instead of putting a lot of money in one project and waiting 4, 5, 6 years for that to be built, we can do projects now. And you'll see those projects being in the Steel Creek area, South Charlotte area, as well as the University City area. So I, for one, would say that having that is important because it stops us from having just a huge concentration of funds on one project, but we're able to spread it throughout the city.
So I don't know if Mayor Pro Tem is asked about that and if we do that in a report, but I'm assuming these are things like adding additional lanes, side, country roads that could be paved, medians to change traffic flow, things like that. Okay. So we'll have to get that report from Ms. Babson as a part of the next budget workshop. Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to kind of, follow up with Ed's comments. I clearly understand where Ed is coming from in terms of the number of competing priorities we have, but I can't think of a higher one than what we're doing regarding affordable housing. And the investment that we're making, while it's significant, still falls short there too, right? And so I just want to, again, say that we need to recommit ourselves to affordable housing. We need to recommit ourselves to gray areas as relates to housing, i.e. On the lower end, 30 AMI and below, shelter, homelessness. Although that's not our direct responsibility, it is a gray area that we play in. The public doesn't know the difference. And so notwithstanding the fact that sidewalks
In any of these scenarios to accomplish that. That's what we're doing. We're kind of faced with a hard number of, help me, I'm not really good at math. So if we have a scenario of about $197 or $98 million, it's how do you want to spend it? And the staff has given you some scenarios. So, Mr. Phipps, I think I'm asking, would you see connectivity of existing roads a higher priority or on this list as opposed to something else?
Well, I don't know. I would see it almost as an opportunity for a petitioner to maybe jump the line, so to speak. I mean, because we've identified projects, but to the extent that we say that there's a road needed, and if the petitioner feels that they are willing to put in some of the funds, but in as much as the road would be a benefit to the city as well, that they want to approach the city to help with the funding of the road, do we have capacity, given what we have on our plate now, do we have capacity to even entertain those type of requests?
I think that's a question for your colleagues because we'd be really creating a matching fund for connectivity based upon rezoning petitions. Is that a fair assessment? So I don't know how your colleagues want to weigh in, or our colleagues want to weigh in on something like that.
And let me add one.
Mr. Bergman, I'm sorry, Mr. Bergman was going to respond first, and then Mr.
Yeah,
Driggs.
I was just going to lay out that what we're trying to put together is a 5-year plan, and during that 5-year plan, council will have the opportunity for slight adjustments based on opportunity. So you're talking about developers. There's other opportunities that may come up, like the state this past year giving us bonus allocation dollars where we can accomplish a project at 20% of what the cost would have been. So I think this is the idea behind this is that this is a 5-year plan, and that council would have the opportunity as we go along to make adjustments based on opportunities.
Okay, Mr. Phipps, any thoughts on?
Okay, I'll thrash that around for a while, because we do have a petition where we got a live situation like that. So I'm just trying to figure out how would we juggle and say, hey, you know, we are committed right now. So I'll give that some thought, but thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Driggs, did you have a comment?
Well, yes, I just wanted to say, I think Mr. Phipps asks a good question, and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but my interpretation of his question is this a presentation about our capital capacity a message that we're sending out saying, don't bother to come to us with any other needs because we are sold out and we have a backlog. So that's an issue, all right? Whether we can kind of say, you know, we're open for business. I would point out that in situations like Pearl Street and Ballantyne, we address that with TIGs and other structures. So we do have opportunities to partner with private developers where maybe there's a confluence of their kind of development and our connectivity and other needs, improvement needs. And Ballantyne is a good example. There are many improvements outside of the development itself, the cost of which is being more than half funded by the developer and a chunk of which is being funded by a TIG from us. So I think the constraints that we're identifying on our capacity could be interpreted by potential partners as a limitation on our ability to be a partner. And that, I think, is the real question here. I mean, the last scenario we're looking at leaves us $35 million underwater in the 24 bond. I'm not sure we're going to want to go there. So if we can only tackle one advanced planning road project and maybe a couple of intersections and stay within our kind of permanent capacity, that list that Ms. Babson referred to is long. And there are a lot of things in places 2 through 5 that I think we ought to be thoughtful and pay attention to. And so I just get back to my same point by way of appearing to respond to Mr. Phipps, that we do need to look at that list, and we need to be mindful of the things that we are not doing, partly because of our choice about affordable housing or any other choice we might be making. So thank you, Mayor. That was just my comment.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Yes, so thank you, Mayor, members of council. I do want to say, definitely there is not the message that we're tapped out and we're not open for business. And I hope I didn't do a double negative. We're open for business and we're not tapped out. We can do a number of things over these bond cycles to reduce the stress on the system. And I don't think there's a scenario right now where we would do 2 roads immediately. So part of what we're trying to do is get some feedback from council. What I'm hearing loud and clearly is sidewalks, roads, affordable housing. At what level is something that we'll have to come back to you with recommendations. Had you come in today and said, we want to get out of the business of affordable housing, that would have been something very different. Or if you came back today and said, we don't want to build roads with the CIP, we'd rather have a different funding source to build roads. Those are the kinds of directional discussions that are important to us at this stage. But again, everything that I've heard over the course of this discussion is that we're in the right space with those locks, and sidewalks are important, affordable housing is important, roads are important, and how do we structure it in such a way that we can give you the best bang for your buck?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Graham?
I'm fine, thank you.
You're good? Okay.
I'm good, thank you.
Ms. Johnson? Ms. Johnson?
Mr. Jones addressed my question. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so
Madam Mayor?
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you. I have a follow-up question. I just want to follow up on Mr. Phipp's question earlier. So what line item would that be? Because ultimately we are leveraging private dollars to improve our infrastructure. So I'm trying to understand what line item would that be, and what is the remaining balance in that line item to leverage private sector dollars for infrastructure improvement.
So what you see on the screen in front of you, the example of what you're speaking of is really Ballantyne Reimagined, which is on top. And in the scenarios that we have, the very last line is public-private partnerships /ED. So I would equate those two as similar. So in these scenarios, there's $15 million of bond, but I can tell you that that's just a straw man scenario. That doesn't mean that it will line up exactly to that. But, Ms. Dodson is always working on those types of opportunities, and so we wanted to make sure that we have it in the scenario, but more than maybe anything else, that's the one that may have to be flexible from bond to bond, where it's lower in one time and then much higher in other times.
Okay, that explains. Thank you, Mr. Bergman. And just to follow up on that, could you provide us in 5 years, last 5 years, what have we spent on public-private partnerships, so that we have some sort of baseline to compare against, to see if that number needs to go up or higher compared to what we have seen in the past?
Sure, we will get you that. And the two main examples would be some of the work at Eastland and then Ballantyne, like we mentioned. But yeah, we will get you that.
Anything else, Ms. Ajmira?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All right, I think that's our last speaker on that topic. And so going back to the next area, we had a discussion or presentation on Monday on the Ad Hoc Committee on Arts and Culture, and we're going to dive into a discussion on that support now. So Mr. Jones is going to start us off.
Okay, so thank you, Mayor, members of council. My goal in the next 60 seconds is to keep Tracy Dodson out of the room. We have a presentation loaded, but I'm not sure that we need to do it. What the team needs, Mayor and Council, is the ad hoc committee did come up with some recommendations. We are ready to begin an analysis of those recommendations. We were hoping that on Monday we would get the nod from the council, that sixth person or seventh person or eighth person, so that we can do the assessment, and that's all we're asking for today. So I don't know if there's somebody from the committee, whether it's the chair or Mr. Bakari or Mr. Driggs, who would like to chime in.
Graham or Mr. Winston. Before we go, can I get, in your notebook, there's a slide on short-term recommendations and long-term recommendations. And I think what the manager is asking is a nod that allows him to move forward based upon these recommendations. So with that, am I recognizing Mr. Bakari? Mr. Bakari?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just tee
And
this up
happy
for us
birthday! Happy birthday to you.
Oh, yeah, right.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. I do not sing, but that was the best I could do, Mr. Bakari.
You know, when I was growing up, I always dreamed that this is how I'd spend my birthday. So thank you all.
How old are you? Okay.
Well, feeling very old. Thank you all, and thanks everyone for the kind notes and things today. So I think I can tee this up very well. I think the manager did a great kind of punchline. I was on this ad hoc arts committee along with council members Isolt, Graham, Winston, and Driggs. So we analyzed the significant investments that we've made as a city to date, and that's over 11 million in 2021 supporting arts and culture on the whole, over 50 million over the last 15 years in direct funding to the ASC. And the 5 members of our committee crafted and approved a very high-level recommendation for the city manager to consider as he and staff perform their work, as he just said to us, in presenting us with the budget. The punchline is we want an innovative internal approach that maximizes the equity, the economic and cultural impacts that our city dollars are having. Mayor Pro Tem covered this extensively Monday night. Council had a robust conversation where staff was able to hear and capture all those inputs and comments as well. So there isn't really a need for us to rehash those details now without additional insights and intel. So the next body of work for our council to do beyond this initial budget discussion is to craft our longer term policy vision that really focuses on outcomes and what we want our investments to ultimately create as impacts. So aside from that, what we need today is for the manager to move ahead in analyzing our recommendation alongside the bigger budgetary picture and other factors at play, and then come and present us back with what his ultimate proposal is on the topic. So no committee itself, like our ad hoc committee, can tell the manager or direct staff what to do in formal actions. But these budget workshops are designed just for that. So since we already have 5 council members who formally supported the recommendations that we discussed Monday night in our strategy session, I recommend we just see if there's one additional council member who's willing to give a head nod for the manager to move forward during this phase while he still owns the budget, taking into account our recommendations while considering those other factors, and then bring that back to us for our ultimate decision as a body. And I think that should really maximize our time here. So if that's acceptable, I just ask, is there one additional council member outside of the Arts Ad Hoc Committee who's willing to give the manager that head nod so that he could move forward in the diligence?
All right, Mr. Bakari, I would suggest that you not limit it to one. So all of those that would suggest that the manager take these short and long-term recommendations, if you just raise your hand, we can see you on. Yes? I'm sorry. Mr. Eggleston, I'm sorry, I did not get your name off the board. So Mr. Eggleston, were you recognized?
Just for the manager, if the manager is tracking what Mr. Bakari said right there, you would be, assuming we give you the go-ahead here, you would be bringing back options for us to consider, one of which would be prompted by the recommendation from the ad hoc committee. Is that correct?
And I'm not sure it would be options. In my budget, I would present an option to the council based on what the ad hoc committee has sent my way.
So I'm going to ask you, the manager brings us a recommended budget. What's in that document is his recommendation, and then it's ours to change.
I guess the option, what would make option plural, I guess, would be for the council to either move forward with that or to proceed as we have historically on that issue.
I'm not clear on what that means, Mr. Eggleston. Can you help me? He can bring us a recommendation based upon the committee, or what was the other choice?
Well, I think my question's answered, but the other choice, I guess, was me saying for us to go more the traditional route that we have with arts funding, or to move forward with what will be brought by the manager as a recommendation based on the committee's work.
And that would be a council decision based upon after the manager's recommendation comes forward, based upon what we get as a hand raising now for the short and long-term recommendations presented today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just pointing out that there's definitive decision being made on the matter with this vote. You're asking the manager to bring forward a
Okay, Mr.
policy
Jones?
version of what
Oh.
the committee has recommended.
Mr. Jones?
If I think I understand the question that Mr. Eggleston has, I would base everything that I'm recommending back to the council on this heightened increase, this $4 million that is coming from the city, with the opportunity to get at least $4 million of match from the private sector would be the foundation of any recommendation I bring back in my budget.
All right, I'm good, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, so if you are, I can see everyone except Ms. Ajmir, I think, stepped away. Mr. Winston, has Mr. Winston stepped away? He did as well. So we've got, I see one.
There he is.
Okay, Mr. Winston. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 8 council members. So if you would just indicate approval for the manager to move forward based upon the recommendations that are included in your materials today. Would you just raise your hand, please? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 7 that have raised their hands. I'll just note it is the committee members.
I think that was 8, Madam Mayor.
Where is the 8th?
8, Malcolm he was already formally with the committee, but he's raising his hand there too.
Okay,
Mr.
8.
Councilman Member Graham, you see him right there. He's
yes,
waving
I
at you.
see him in the car now. I just couldn't see him in the car before.
Good.
So that's 8 members in favor. So Mr. Jones, sufficient? All right, thank you very much for that. Now, the next item that we have is on Charlotte, wait, what are we doing? Water, Charlotte Water?
Yes.
All right, we're going to go to Charlotte Water and the materials, and who do I recognize?
I'll start. So we have Angela Charles and Mike Davis and some of their team down in CH14. I would just note that they presented a longer version of the presentation to the Budget Committee a couple of weeks ago. So what you're going to be seeing today is a condensed version of each. And in the appendix, you'll see the other slides that were presented at committee. So as long as she's ready, I will turn it over to Angela.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor Lyles, Council, Manager Jones, and staff. I am Angela Charles, Director of Charlotte Water, and we appreciate the opportunity for the water team to provide you a budget update this afternoon. Water, wastewater, and stormwater are working together in this community under a One Water vision. According to the U.S. Water Alliance, the One Water approach envisions managing all water in a community in an integrated, inclusive, and sustainable manner to secure a prosperous future for our children, our community, and our country. So as we look how water operates in our community, we have 2 funds, 2 enterprise funds, the Water Wastewater Fund and the Stormwater Fund, that have continued to implement and plan projects to produce outcomes and to project needs for our future, even in the midst of a pandemic. So I will now turn it over to Mike Davis, who will talk about the Stormwater Fund.
All right, I'm trying to advance the slide.
Mr. Davis, hit page down. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, good afternoon. My name is Mike Davis. Pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. And so it is a great privilege to be able to present really the work of a much larger group of people, kind of looking back at our past year and looking ahead to the FY 2022 budget. And so we've condensed a lot of things down in just these 5 slides that I will walk you through. The first of which is just to kind of put into scale, as we might in any budget presentation, the kind of work that we do, and what we believe is an efficient manner in which we do it. And so on the left, you'll just see a little bit of kind of quick stats. Mainly, I would just highlight, just as kind of a sampling of the kind of work that we do, that we are very project management focused, very construction focused, and our work really manifests as physical infrastructure, oftentimes in the form of drain pipes and related structural facilities, but also in the form of stream restoration, which is really closely tied to our mission to improve surface water quality. And we do that with a little over 180 folks. And we also believe we do it in an efficient way. And so that sort of cube on the right just gives some of the common metrics we might think about as we seek to deploy that capital. So $86 million for FY 2020 was done in a way that sustained our AAA bond rating. And what I think is particularly noteworthy is that we were able to do 88 cents of capital investment per dollar collected, which is a very high ratio. And when we talk about where we've been as an organization and look back at the last year, really kind of starts with thinking about COVID. And I wanted to talk about it in maybe just three ways. The first of which is the financial impact. And so when we look at that chart on the right, it maybe is hard to detect at the scale, but there's two lines, one of which is the line representing our charges, cumulative charges going back to March of last year, kind of when that pandemic was really kicking in, compared to a line that sits almost exactly on top of it, which is what we got back in the door as revenue against those charges. So the difference in those two lines ends up being about $700,000 of impact, or about 1.2% of total charges. So not insignificant, but also well within what we can manage. Then we think about sort of how does it impact our productivity? Stormwater services and how it's made up, about 2/3 of our workforce does the type of work that transitions pretty well, as it turns out, to working from home. So we've made the kind of adaptations that many have, and try to keep our level of productivity high, and have found innovative ways to do that. The other third of our workforce is in the field. It's largely construction related, investigations related. And so we just had to, again, do like the rest of the world has done, is figure out how to do that work in the safest way as possible. And then we have, of course, done periodic suspension of some volunteer events that would have otherwise brought people into close contact during that period. And then lastly is just kind of thinking about workforce impact. And this is not quantitative by any means, but while on the one hand, we feel very good about our level of productivity, which I'll show you in a minute, we do recognize that there are just some challenges in staying connected as a workforce, how you train new people and do professional development. It's just harder to do remotely. All right, so if we want to talk about productivity, and there's far more that goes on in stormwater services than what I've represented on this slide, but I think many of you know we've undergone a fairly significant transformation in the last couple of years in how we approach dealing with what we've called minor repair requests. And this is where people in our community are observing we've got failing infrastructure and they're seeking help. And so what we did back in FY 2020, many of you would know that we set out on a journey to really significantly increase our level of production. So what you see in the chart on the right, if your eyes go to the bottom line, that was the trajectory that we were on going into the FY 2020 budget year, of how many of those minor repair requests we were positioned to resolve over the next 5 years. And what we set out to do, and what your budget set in motion, was trying to resolve 1,700 projects, which was an 83% increase over what that baseline represented. So then those two dots, the 260 and the 526, is where we've been able to come in at the close of FY 2020, and where we predict we'll be at the end of FY 2021, to not only meet that projection, but slightly exceed. And one thing that's worth pointing out about this chart is you'll notice that that projection line, the goal line, actually bends upward. It is not just steeper, but it bends upward, which really means every year we've got to figure out how to get better at what we did than the year before. So we've shown you this graphic once before. It's just a visual icon of a way we talk about sort of opening up the project pipeline. How do we take 1,700 projects as a goal, and after 5 years get them pushed through that project delivery pipeline? And it requires doing several things. Some, it's about reform of how we move those projects through the pipeline, but it's also about resources. It's about how we handle our contracts and things like that. So there's a tie to your annual budget of how we address resource needs in order to push that volume of work through. And it's been successful. And so the last slide I have is really just to kind of put this in the context of our financial planning. And so I won't read all the bullets that are on the left, but maybe the two that are really important are the last two of those bullets, which is really just to acknowledge that what we do in terms of financial planning, we think is the best practice. It's a 10-year financial plan where we're always modeling and updating for sort of the key assumptions that act on our capacity to take in revenue and deploy that as project investments. And we do that collaboratively with the finance department, with budget, and it's reviewed by the city's financial consultant. That lets us create the plan that you see on the right. The way this chart was put together was really to go back to 2020, because again, that's when we started out on what we've called that 5-year surge goal. And so in the middle column is what that plan had envisioned us doing to try to have revenues sustainable for the plan, trying to make it never too big in any one year, but provide the revenue necessary to support those targets. And on the right is the actuals. So you'll note that 2 years in a row, we've not had fee increases. And so as we go into the FY 2022 budget, and we think about what had been a 3.6% target, I feel confident in telling you that we would be able to come forward with a budget recommendation that would be under that 3.6, but ultimately left to be as part of the city manager's overall budget recommendation, which we'll present to you later in the budget process. And so that's what I've got in terms of my slides, and I'm happy to take questions now. These slides go straight into Charlotte Water slides, so we can talk stormwater or keep going at your pleasure.
A recommendation on rates in the budget that he'll present. All right, let's go to Charlotte Water.
Thank you, Mayor Lyles. Again, Charlotte Water has a vision to continue being the leading water utility, recognized for excellence and dedication to our people, community, region, and environment. And what we think is significant about 2020 is that Charlotte Water did not suffer any loss of service due to the global pandemic. And as a reminder, Charlotte Water is a regional utility serving about 1.2 million folks in our region daily. So we do think that that is significant to point out. Just some quick stats about the utility. We're pumping in FY 20, and that is continued to date, 108.9 million gallons of water a day, 88.8 million gallons of wastewater treated a day through 8,850 miles of pipe. And so again, when I talked about One Water, we're talking about, just to keep the distinction, water, wastewater, and what I love to say is wash, brush, flush. If you think those three things, you are talking about the water, wastewater fund. If you look at the capital investment that was made in 2020 in our community, that was $280.7 million invested in capital improvement projects. We continue to be one of the few utilities our size in the nation. We are in the top 20 in size in the United States, but we are one of the few that have a AAA, that have maintained and continue to have a AAA bond rating from Moody's, Fitch, and Standard & Poor's. And as a reminder to everyone, for 3 cents, you can purchase a gallon of Charlotte Water. That is 3 cents. The capital improvement program that is, or plan, is $2.38 billion for the next 5 years. And when you look at, we put our plan or categorize our projects into buckets, but we always have to look at projects for capacity for growth as opposed to projects for rehab and rehabilitation and replacement. And so we are looking at 56% of our 5-year capital program really being dedicated to projects for capacity for growth in our region, and that's on the water and wastewater side. And then we've got 23% for rehab and replacement of existing infrastructure. And we think that that is important, not think, we know that's important. When you look at a utility that's been around since the late 1800s, we know we have pipe in the ground that's been around since the 1920s. It's important that we strike that balance in our planning between capacity projects and projects to rehab and replace our existing infrastructure. Thank you. Investments, we wanted to also show council how we relate to the strategic priorities in our community. And I have said that this is Mr. Jones's favorite slide out of everything that we have to present today. But we just wanted you to get a feel for investments, water and wastewater investments that are happening in the corridors of opportunity. Of course, we believe and know that for all types of initiatives that happen in our region, that there is infrastructure in the ground to support those projects, water, wastewater, and stormwater projects. And so as we look at initiatives like the corridors of opportunity, it's very important that we are also aligning with the strategic priorities of the organization. We have been impacted like every other utility in the nation due to COVID in terms of accounts eligible for disconnection. Normally, we would have about 3,000 accounts eligible for connection, and we are carrying around 16,000 accounts in our community, and we have been for the past few months that are eligible for a disconnection. In October of last year, we made the decision to put all folks, all customers of Charlotte Water on a 1-year automatic payment plan. And so we think that that implies that we will not resume disconnection of water service until October of 2021. And we believe that that is the right thing to do for our community in the midst of a pandemic. Now, there are other utilities in our community who have resumed disconnections, and there are many other water utilities in the state of North Carolina who have resumed disconnections. We believe that we are leaders here, and that if we continue to have the good support of our community and good support of this council, we believe that, and that is a business practice. All utilities have this type of business practice, but we believe that October 2021 is when we would resume that practice in our community. And we just believe that that's where the community is. Water is related to public health, and it's just the thing that we want to do for our community. Just like the Stormwater Fund, we do have a long-term financial plan. This is the prediction of our FY 2020 rate model. We do know that Manager Jones will be presenting his official recommendation in terms of a rate increase preliminarily. We want to stay within the range of what the plan has predicted for the Water Wastewater Fund. And of course, that will support a $501 million FY22 budget. And again, we are supporting a $2.38 billion capital improvement program. Growth has not stopped in our community. Even in the midst of the pandemic, Charlotte Water set more meters in calendar year 2020 than we ever have in the history of the utility. And so again, we are in a community that really has, demands on the water and wastewater system. And so they're hopefully there will be a recommendation come forth from Mr. Jones, according to the plan. Is that the last one? Okay, so I will end as I began talking about One Water and the vision of water, wastewater, and stormwater operating as one. And there is a short video that's about a minute and I think 49 seconds that will be shown. And then we will entertain questions. And on behalf of 1,200 water professionals in our community, we certainly thank council for your support. And so if we can get CourtCom to go ahead and run the video.
Really good, thank you. Okay, we do have, we're going to have questions now, and I want to recognize Councilmember Winston. Mr. Winston?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Miss Angela Charles. I know she gets a lot of props in the business community and the municipal community, but you know, she's bounced around as every employee has, but in particular over the past year from assistant city manager, dealing with several special projects. It seems like Mr. Jones will put her on all the special ones, and now back as our water director. I just want to thank you for the way you continue to serve our organization and our constituents. I wanted to ask about just from a budgetary standpoint and operational standpoint, what are this, being that these capital improvements are ongoing and so large? I know a couple of years ago we invested in a workforce development in this area. I want to just kind of see where our efforts are there and what our continued investment will look like. Are there any needs, or is there anything more that we can do if we increase our investments in that area? Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Councilmember Winston, for that recognition. And we do have a great team in Charlotte Water and in the city of Charlotte. We do have an apprenticeship program, and we have continued that program throughout the pandemic. And so I'm looking here at our data here. Right now we have 9 apprentices who are currently with us throughout the pandemic. In FY20, we had 15 water and wastewater apprentices, and 93% of those are presently employed. And so we do have plans to accelerate our apprenticeship program. COVID has caused us to slow it up just a tad. But certainly as the community recovers and we get what is called herd immunity, we do plan on continuing and accelerating our apprenticeship program. That's something that we believe in stronger, and we believe that that is our workforce of the future. And what's really nice about this is that we were already dipping our toe into stormwater. So now that we are aligned with stormwater, we do plan on expanding our program to include folks in the stormwater sector also.
Thank you. And if there's anything that we can do from a budgetary standpoint or a council guidance standpoint to strengthen and accelerate that work beyond our current capabilities, I hope we will agree to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Thanks for reminding us that we have been doing this work around workforce development for years, and really appreciate that comment. Mr. Phipps.
Yeah, I was just curious about, Mr. Davis talked about the $700,000, I guess that's reduction in revenue as a result of the COVID pandemic. What I wanted to get a feel for is, like, in as much as we've had a lot of people working from home, and I guess that meant that water usage was way down in our office buildings uptown. I mean, you know, not a lot of hand washing going on uptown, not another commodes being flushed or whatever. But I mean, how much of a gap did we see between the loss of that kind of water usage uptown with everybody working at home? Is that what's reflected in that $700,000 reduction? Or I'm just trying to get a feel for did we measure the gap in water usage as a result of our change in work status?
Yes, I'll take that one, Councilmember Phipps. The 700,000 refers to the storm water fund. Now, in the wastewater fund, I can't talk this afternoon. In the water wastewater fund, we are projecting a gap of somewhere between 7 to 10 million. And some of that is, what we call deferred revenue that we will be collecting later on. Now, our consumption has remained relatively flat, and that's mainly because folks stayed in our community. So even though the water usage may not have been in a tower in uptown Charlotte, we were still getting water usage throughout the different premises and dwellings, in the community. The gap is mainly due to, Councilmember Phipps, to folks not paying. And so we have been aggressively contacting folks in our community. We developed a customer care program. We're one of the few utilities, and I don't know of any yet in the nation, who's made a commitment to contact every customer who's eligible for a disconnect. We are picking up the phone, and we've personally contacted over 11,000 people in our community using Charlotte Water folks and folks from other city departments to tell them about funds that are available in our community to help with water bill assistance. So that's a long way around to your answer. We have consumption is flat. Okay. We do see a gap due to COVID. The gap is mainly due to folks being delinquent in paying their bills. The plan is, and we're executing that plan, is to contact all 16,000 folks in our community and inform them of programs in our community to help with water bill assistance. So we have partnerships with over 16,000 folks, nonprofits, not really folks, but nonprofits in our community to assist people with their water bills. And I think a lesson from COVID is that we need a Charlotte Water Foundation, a utility our size, serving the number of people we serve in the region, should have a nonprofit established to create those partnerships out into the community. And whether we're in a pandemic mode or not, we need to have something more formalized to help folks who are struggling with their bills. So we've got a team working on that. That's one idea that we've pitched to Mr. Jones, that now is the time. That is a lesson for us. And then that's something that we would continue to have no matter what the economic situation is in the community.
Mr. Phipps?
Okay, thank you.
I have to say, Ms. Charles, to hear that kind of thinking, as we know that we're coming to a place that perhaps we will be able to begin to reopen, but it will be different. And your solution is one of those things that I think would be an example of change that's very positive as a result of this pandemic. Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is one of those rare occasions where I can wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Winston. We really need to recognize the outstanding performance of Charlotte Water during COVID, uninterrupted supply of clean water, the efforts they've made to protect people, the financial capacity that enabled them to shelter people from shutoffs. So, Ms. Charles, to you and your team, congratulations. I did have a question about stormwater. In the past, we talked about stormwater in terms of backlogs and things like that. And there was a whole narrative around tiers of service and backlogs. We've made huge progress since then, which again, I think is a great credit to the team. And Mr. Davis explained how we've accelerated projects. But do we have any update on what those waiting lists look like now, or what the status is of service requests that are still in the pipeline? Thank you.
Sure, thank you for that question. So in the budget committee discussion, that question was raised, and we're compiling a report that'll give all of council kind of a complete view on that. What I would just say, sort of, painting with a broad brush, is part of what we're achieving with the reforms to the program is we're really changing everything about the way we do business in terms of what qualifies for work in the first place. So we're kind of attacking it on both ends. And I can get into sort of what I mean by that if you would like this detail. But on the one hand, while we are trying to make sure we're consistent and using some discipline in what qualifies for our work, as I mentioned in the presentation, we're also ramping up our capacity to be able to resolve what we had as outstanding. So as I mentioned, we had about 1,700 projects that we think we can get done in 5 years. But as, of course, we are resolving those, there will continue to be new needs that arise. When the end of that 5 years occurs, our capacity to resolve new repair requests that come to us that need our attention will be greater than the volume of work that is coming in. So what that allows us to do, what we've talked about in some other conversations, is shift to what we've called an asset management approach. We really get away from thinking about backlogs and instead begin to think about what do we know about our system, where do we need to make proactive interventions in the maintenance of that system so that overall we're able to maintain it at a lower cost to the program. But we have to kind of be able to retire that backlog, as you say. And so that 5-year plan lets us do it, and we think we'll be better, certainly far ahead of a steady state by the end of that 5-year period.
That's great work. Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you, Mr. Driggs. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd also like to congratulate Ms. Charles. She does a great job, and it's great to hear that Charlotte Water is making an intentional decision to extend the moratorium on shutoffs and to work with the public even after the federal government lifted that, because we know that COVID is a virus. There were people that were struggling before, and there are going to be people that are struggling after. So I hope that this pandemic has made the nation and government organizations more empathetic to individuals who were in situations where they needed, housing and rental assistance and assistance with the utilities. So I would support that foundation. And I wanted to ask, is that something that we are going to discuss adding to this budget conversation, Mr. Jones?
So a couple things. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. One, I'd like to jump on the Angela Charles bandwagon also, in that she said something that's very interesting, the corridors of opportunity being a favorite of mine, and she should take credit for a very contentious discussion we had in the 15th floor conference room, which actually led to the corridors of opportunity. I say all that as a backdrop, and thank you, Angela, is that the same type of effort around our employees, whether it's in water or stormwater or in solid waste, as Rodney spoke about earlier, is a part of the entire organization. So as we go with our job study and being an employer of choice or a best place to work, you can be rest assured that in the budget that I present to you, and I guess it's May 3rd, we'll have components around our employees that are consistent with what you've heard today, but not just from a department aspect, but the entire enterprise.
Okay. Ms. Johnson, we can't hear you. Ms. Johnson?
Can you hear me now?
Just barely, but you were speaking. We could see that you were trying to, you must have been muted. So if you start at the beginning.
Yeah, thank you. That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Bakari?
Yeah, I just wanted to just recognize Mike Davis and the team. It can be easy in this unsexy work of stormwater and things like that to just breeze by it. But the magnitude of that work cannot be overlooked. And for those of you who we came in at the same time, almost 4 years ago, we were sitting with an unsurmountable problem of a mountain in front of us. And while there's still a lot of work to be done, this is a promising direction of some tough decisions and some hard work that's needed to be done for a long time that's getting done. So I just don't want to move past this point without just a moment of recognition. And now back to work, Mike.
All right, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Likewise, I just want to thank Mike and his team for their responsiveness and their hard work on a very often unpopular decisions they have to make and take. And he's been really responsive to requests I've had to go out and see citizens and to look at situations that are really difficult. So thanks to Mike, thank you and your team.
Thank you.
All right. So that is the conclusion of our workshop topics for today. Our next budget workshop is April the 7th. And then I think after that, it becomes a part of the manager's work to bring us a recommended budget. So with that, if having no further topics to cover, we're going to adjourn this workshop and be prepared for the next meeting, I guess, next Monday. No, not Monday. Ms. Jackson said, no, not Monday. So whatever it is, thank you very much. The 15th. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great evening.
Okay.